Well, good night, everyone, and welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. I've invited Alex Vezina back to our show. He's the CEO of Prepared Canada, emergency preparedness company, and he's incredibly knowledgeable. He's got a master's in emergency preparedness. He runs a company that deals with emergency preparedness. We've had him on our show a couple of times in regards to COVID-19 and lockdowns and opening ups and vaccines and everything. And I wanted to talk to him tonight about a couple of issues associated with where we are, primarily vaccines. And, you know, this controversy about proving you've got vaccines or vaccine passports effectively, whether they make sense, what are some of the issues associated with it. And then I also want to talk about some other issues if we have the time, the Delta variant, how we're opening up. Whether you should get what you should get as your second shot, etc. Anyway, Alex, how are you? Welcome to our show.
I'm doing great. How are you doing, Brian?
Very well, thank you. So, passports. When I was in elementary school, I think you had every year, different vaccinations that you had to take, and everyone kept their little card to prove what they had had over time. When I went to either Nigeria or China, I think I had to take a whole bunch of shots, and I had to prove that I had those shots before I was allowed entry into the country. And those shots were, the proof of those shots was actually stapled into the back of my passport, and I had to carry it. And it was, both those circumstances were reasonably accepted. But now there's the big controversy about whether we need some sort of proof that you've got the vaccine, and frankly, two vaccines. And two shots. And you've seen news of some states or some countries wanting to have proof, people questioning whether, if you've got the two shots and you can prove it, you can travel, you can enter countries, and even business establishments that either want proof of vaccines for employees or for customers. What do you think about this issue? Should vaccine passports be mandatory?
Okay, so because that is a potentially loaded question, I'm going to focus on specifically the final part of it, of should vaccine passports be mandatory? And I'm going to have to give you my professional opinion based on what I think virtually anyone in public safety professionally would answer, which is, should we implement something that is minimally invasive to public freedoms compared to alternatives, that has a direct impact on reducing human loss of life? And the answer is going to be yes. Now, there's going to be a but with a whole bunch of implementation caveats, because there are things that need to get done right. Because if you implement a bad system that doesn't do what it intends, then you get a whole bunch of harm without any good. But on concept, should we have vaccine passports? Yes. Pandemics are generally bad. There's no real other answer there for someone, if you're asking me professional opinion based on my industry's background. It's
So if that's your opinion, more than likely public health, emergency preparedness people, et cetera, are going to say this makes sense to have some sort of vaccine passport. Is it a passport that we should be using just when we travel internationally, or should we have to have it like an ID card that we have to show all the time?
Well, and that's where it gets into the how does it get implemented question. So whether or not we need to restrict movement to stop pandemics from getting out of control, that's going to be a yes, period. Just it's been a long time since we've had smallpox around, but the potential for something like smallpox again, or a pandemic worse than COVID, is here. It's very real. The medical industry is terrified of this. So the precedent of vaccine passports have been around for quite some time. As for the specific implementation that we're talking about now, we're going to have to go concern by concern, because it's way too broad to answer. So, is the question, should we have it to get into a bar? Should we have it to get to just go on flights, et cetera? I need a really specific question.
Okay, so let's talk international travel, flights.
Yes. That's going to be one of the first things that that you'll want a passport for, because that's how you basically get a pandemic.
Okay, big events, concerts, hockey games, Trump rallies.
I don't know why you threw in Trump rallies at the end.
For fun.
Oh, well, to be fair though, any political rally, right? Okay, virus dependent, and probably, right, mass spread or super spreader events. Probably, if you have a virus that can explode and get out of control very, very quickly, and you've identified it, and there's a specific vaccine that already exists, then yeah, maybe, right? Like we already effectively have vaccine passporting for measles in schools. There have been cases in the past where parents have been charged with child abuse of their own children for not getting them vaccinated, right? Like we've already do this. We don't do it directly with a card, but we do it implicitly. And when I say we, I mean the States. It's happened in the States. It's happened here. It's happened in Canada. It's happened in the EU, specifically for measles and, the claims of not vaccinating your kids is child abuse.
Okay, bars, restaurants.
Depends on virus. Now, if we had smallpox today, I would say yes to virtually everything. That's the reality. When you have a virus that's 20 to 30% lethality rate, you can't go anywhere unless you're clear. But
and smallpox had that kind of lethality.
Yeah, and one of the first iterations of the vaccines that were rolled out in the 1900s, not the original the cowpox variant, which was because the smallpox vaccine was the first vaccine ever. Right, but and one of the original synthesized ones or newer ones had like a 0.5 to 2% fatality rate. Even the vaccine did, right? So when we're talking about like a super virus that we're worried about, 1/5 of the human race being killed. Yeah, okay, you're not going anywhere. But that's why I'm saying it depends on the virus. But in general, concept of vaccine passports, when you have something that is a severe threat, there's very little limit on what you can really place on something from a public safety standpoint, because you're looking at so many dead. You hit utilitarianism very quickly with these types of numbers. You get where I'm going from with this? It sounds,
but we don't have that kind of lethality rate or mortality rate with COVID-19, correct?
Well, here's the thing: between variants and not knowing what this is going to be like in a year, and not knowing when our vaccine hesitancy is going to really show up, because we've had significantly less hesitancy than we thought we would. So if it turns out that 95% of the population just gets immunized, we don't need vaccine passports. They wouldn't be necessary. We would just have effective herd immunity anyways. But so they're really what the passport is used for is to nudge the middle ground people who are hesitant on getting the vaccine to get to whatever your herd immunity threshold is, so that you don't have the same number of deaths. Now, it's a bit complicated with COVID because it doesn't stop transmission the way that you want it to with other ones, but still, it depends. but in general, we'll need to see what happens with the virus. What now? What as of now do we need it? From my field's perspective, yes. And frankly, most of the world has started doing it anyways. So we're about to be forced practically to do it regardless.
We're chatting tonight with Alex Vezina. He's CEO of Prepared Canada about vaccines and vaccine passports. We're going to take a break and come back after just a few messages. Stay with us, please. Mm-hmm. Welcome back to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. We're chatting tonight with Alex Vezina. He is the CEO of Prepared Canada. He's a smart guy. He's an emergency preparedness expert. Excuse me. And we're talking tonight about vaccines and vaccine passports. Alex, there must be a lot of issues associated with implementing a vaccine passport. Maybe we should just run through some of those issues and what you think they are and how you think we might be able to address them. What are some of the issues?
Okay, so quick list, and some of these take longer to discuss than others, and in many ways these are related to each other. There's concerns around fraud or fraudulent passports, which you have with any sort of ID or that government would issue or anyone would issue. There are concerns around different types of exemptions. There are, what do we do with people who have health exemptions? What do we do with people that have religious or belief-based exemptions? There are general security risks for security of your health information, security of your data, There's quite a few. So, and there, of course, and there end up being smaller versions of those risks once we start talking about them.
So let's talk about fraud. How do you deal with the fraud? What is the fraud issue and how do you deal with it?
Okay, so starting with any sort of ID that you have has a potential fraud issue, and think about trying to buy alcohol, trying to get into a nightclub, etc. When you are, when you're young, we've all done it or heard of it at least. Fake ID because you want to do something because you're not old enough yet. That type of idea. Fake IDs are an issue. With vaccine passports, if we start stopping people from doing virtually anything with them, there are going to be people that don't want to get vaccinated that are going to try to find a way to get a fraudulent version. So in order to
stop that, how are we going to stop that?
So in terms of stopping that, in order to stop that, you need to find a way to verify the ID in real time, fundamentally. So the passport has to be something that is scannable, where the given business can scan it and get a verifiable yes or no, fundamentally.
So not just something you look at.
Sorry?
Not just something you look at.
Well, if it's something you just look at it, we're going to have to train everyone on them. And fraudulent IDs work to buy alcohol. So that hasn't worked, everywhere. So at some point, we're going to have to evolve ID systems and think about scanning them. Now, scanning-based IDs around passports have already been done. The United Nations and the WHO has already started developing these as of last February, and many governments have picked up off of what they already designed and are rolling out similar versions. Manitoba has rolled out their version of this. They started to last week, right? So this is already happening. But essentially, what you need is some sort of card that can be scanned, or some sort of paper with a barcode that can be scanned, so that the business can determine you're good to go. Now, as part of that, the business needs the ability to scan the barcode or scan the card, which means you need to make sure that whatever you're doing, business can afford to implement. So either we're giving every business these scanners, or we're making a phone app that every business can use, and we're assuming all these businesses have smartphones, or we're doing something in order to verify this. Whenever you do that, and this is where the security concern starts coming in, and there's a few different parts of this, you have the issue like we have with credit cards, where you can steal credit card information when you're scanning them at a business. And there have been credit card fraud schemes where you go pay for gas or something, and then the business takes your credit card information, and then you have a charge show up down the road on your card. So if bank cards are stealable, I would argue that health cards or vaccine passport cards are stealable in terms of the information. So it's just looking at what kind of risk you're assuming and whether or not that's okay, or if you can stop it at all. So whenever you introduce the card, there's some risk where it's going to be fraudulent or someone's going to steal the information. That's going to, you're going to deal with that problem, period.
Okay. So we got fraud issues. We got privacy issues.
Okay. Now, well, more on the privacy issue, because the fraud and the privacy issue are related.
Yeah.
And they can both be addressed similarly. So if we don't store all of your health information on the card, which is what, frankly, the World Health Organization has already started recommending, and most of the medical industry has started focusing on anyways, the medical industry in general is really, really cautious about giving out medical information. If anyone has ever worked in a health department before, they know exactly how draconian they are about you looking at or getting anywhere near medical files. So they're on side with this. What will probably happen, and if not, then should be heavily considered, is a separate server or system will be made with just basically the check marks of whether or not you've gotten vaccinated for specific things and no other data. So if your card is compromised, all that they could ever possibly get are your vaccine records. And that's not as dangerous as them getting all.
But you think this would be vaccine records, not just COVID-19 vaccine records?
Well, measles. So I mean, we discussed concerns with, you know, measles and other types of vaccines. My viewpoint on this is down the line, 5-10 years from now, proof of concept from this is going to show that you can put vaccine records on a card and then allow or disallow people who are high risk from certain events and stop super spreading events. You know, right after 9/11, we had privacy open up and significantly for convenience. And it's not a stretch to imagine that certain public health things are about to become more normalized now. Like, you know what, your family has a card for your vaccine records, or you have your standard vaccine records for whether or not you can go to school, like what you were talking about. Or, you know, let's say you want to go to a massive party where there's 300 people and there's something going around. Well, we already have the system in place with this card. Why can't we just add another vaccine to the system and make sure you have your check mark?
Right. So you think it's going to become a vaccine record effectively for?
Sorry?
It's going to be a record of all your vaccines.
It could be. I mean, we've already built the system. Why not use it? And that might scare some people on the privacy side.
Because then someone's going to say we should add the flu shot to it.
Well, that's the thing. And look, and I know that when I say something like that, when I say we've already built the system, why not use it? A lot of people, you know, their alarm bells go up and they go, whoa, 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 this is what I was afraid of. The government building a system, and then, oh, this is useful. Let's tag on this thing. Let's tag on this thing. Let's tag on this thing. And the problem with precedents being that and government's getting out of control. And there are many people with that opinion, and I understand that risk. So what I'm talking about is figuring out to what extent they can this can kind of go overboard,
right?
And then really reining in and figuring out to what extent it's probably actually going to go overboard and how much help it can actually provide. Because the reality is we shouldn't have huge percentages of kids in school without measles immunizations. We just shouldn't.
Right.
We should not have a huge swath of society not immunized against polio. Like, we shouldn't. Like, so some of these things are significantly less invasive than the alternatives. And the reality is, frankly, that if we don't do something like this, we get a greater and greater risk of just going back down into some form of lockdown 4 years from now for some other virus, because the health departments in Canada and Health in Canada has basically concluded that lockdowns work. They've concluded that there are no confounding variables or insufficient ones to disprove that lockdowns work. Whether or not you agree or disagree, the Canadian science has said they work. So there's proof of concept. It's been normalized. You want to get every single public health thing that you can that reduces your chance of them saying, okay, time for lockdown.
Well, we should come back to this because, you know, a lot of American southern states and Republican states think that they've proven that lockdowns don't work and opening up works. But let's come back to that in a minute.
Well, I mean, but they're not Canada. That's the point.
Well,
so whether or not.
So Americans are different.
No, whether or not other side science agrees, our scientists and our doctors think they work, and you're fighting against a doctor on medicine, you're not going to win. So that's basically it.
Well, with all due respect, a bunch of politicians in the United States and elsewhere in the world have fought against physicians and have won, I think, number one in politics and number two in the public opinion, where, you know, a lot of Republican states have made a positive out of opening up early, not locking down late, or not locking down at all. And so far, the statistics would show that they have not harmed in public health, and they've benefited hugely economically.
And virtually all Canadian statistics, especially around political polling, have shown that doctors poll higher here, and it is politically untenable in Canada to go against what a doctor is saying right now.
Okay, so you tell me, why is it that New York is worse than Texas and Florida, when Texas and Florida, as an example, had lockdown far later and opened up far earlier, and the whole time through had far more lax rules? And if the lockdowns work, and if COVID-19 is real, long term, that should turn around. Texas and Florida should have more infections and worse mortality, but it hasn't proven out so far.
Okay, but I'm not saying that lockdowns work. This is I think the point that's being missed. You know my opinion on what we should do and the various choices that we can make strategically. I've said it in March of 2020. The point is, the Canadian medical industry has determined that lockdowns work. Doesn't matter whether they do or not, they have been determined to work. That is their opinion. You can take any data you want from outside and say they're wrong, they will say that you are wrong. Doesn't matter.
Okay.
That's the point. So I'm not saying they work. I'm saying they think they work.
We should do the analysis and find out whether they actually.
I agree. We probably should.
We probably should.
But,
okay, so let's come back to vaccines. Exemptions. Should there be any? Religious, health.
Okay, this is tricky. Now, this is really tricky. There's yes and no's to both, and you assume a lot of things on this. So you have to do them one at a time. We'll start with non-health based because health gets really interesting. Well, they're both interesting, but okay. So with religious and with belief-based exemptions to vaccinations in general, a given society has to ask itself the question: what is more sacred? Public safety or freedom of religion? Fundamentally, because the argument for disallowing people, for the argument for I am exempt from vaccines is in public safety thought about to be basically a similar argument or the same argument to, well, my religion says I'm allowed to carry around a weapon. Except in the case of not being exempt from vaccines, it's effectively like saying I'm allowed to carry around the weapon and then throw it at people. So the problem here is you're fundamentally stating that the belief makes it okay to put people in harm's way. So a society has to come to a decision on where they're going to side on that. And depending on where they side on that, that's basically your answer.
Okay.
And for every
country, is there a religion that believes that vaccines are wrong?
Is there?
I don't know. I'm asking you.
Well, I think that's the question. Is there a belief system that believes that vaccines are wrong?
Belief system is you answered the question.
Of religion, belief, etc. Right? So
a QAnon believer might not believe, or someone that's a conspiracy theory believer might not believe. I asked you if there's a religion that believes the vaccines are wrong.
Well, is QAnon a religion?
I don't know.
Could it be?
I don't believe it's a religion.
Well, maybe not yet.
It may be a cult. I don't believe it's a religion.
Well, what's the difference? And think about that. Fundamentally, there are differences. There are definitely differences, but how does a government figure out what the difference is legislatively? So are we now saying that you have, your recognized registered religions and then not, and then suddenly these beliefs are legitimate beliefs and these are illegitimate beliefs? Are we going to split hairs there? Like this is a practical issue.
No, I agree. And, if it's because someone's a follower of some silly website that believes vaccines are causing autism or whatever, I don't think they should be excluded. They should not be given an exemption. But if someone actually is a part of a religion, I just don't know of a religion that like I'm thinking about. You talked about carrying around a weapon. So the Sikh faith believes in this what's it called, a kapoor or something like that, a sword that one wears. The Mennonites are pacifists and don't believe in fighting a war. So I think that those are religious beliefs that society has accepted as appropriate or okay. I don't know a religion that has made a determination on vaccines, but maybe I'm wrong.
Right. No, but the claim is made when it's a non-medical exemption. The claim is that person's belief system, whatever it is means it qualifies them for an exemption, or there is some form of freedom of bodily or medical autonomy argument based on belief. Fundamentally, that's what the argument that they make.
We're chatting with Alex Vezina tonight about vaccine passports and some issues in regards to fraud and privacy and exemptions. We're going to take a break and come back more with Alex in just a minute. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Second 960. We're chatting tonight about COVID-19 with Alex Vezina. He's the CEO of Prepared Canada. I wanted to catch up with him on a couple of different issues. We've spoken to him a few times before. He is CEO of Prepared Canada. He's an emergency preparedness expert. Alex, we've just been talking about vaccines and vaccine passports. Let's take a step back for a second. Some of these vaccines, they say, are good against some of the variants, and the variants seem to be growing. Tell me, what do you think is happening with the trajectory of variants? The Delta variant is the one that people appear quite concerned about. And do we think vaccines are effective against them? And does the presence of variants impact our desire or the need to get vaccinated more quickly?
Okay. Regardless of the variants, there are other variants of the vaccine, like the original strain, and ones that we've dealt with previously, that are still around that the vaccines work well against and we verified. So irrespective of Delta, there are other variants that are still in the population that still have fairly high lethality rates that the vaccines work against. And the risk math on that, I think, has been done time and time again. And unless you're allergic to the vaccine or your doctor has otherwise advised that the vaccine is dangerous to you, it's a fairly easy decision
to get
as
the
far
vaccine.
as risk is concerned. Now, as far as Delta is concerned, the Delta variant's tricky. Today, for example, the Star put out an article stating that some of the vaccines are 90% effective against Delta, but Al Jazeera put out that they're not. So same day, we have two different articles citing two different academic studies saying completely opposite things. We have no idea. And we should be okay telling people the truth. We don't know. It's pretty early. The Delta variant's spreading pretty fast. It's pretty scary for people in medicine, and we don't know. We might know in a month, right? We don't know. And the Delta variant isn't going to necessarily be the last mutation. But there are other versions of COVID that are still lethal that the vaccines work against, and they're here, and they work. So do you, and I'm trying to find a really great analogy here. Just because wearing a seatbelt doesn't work well against your house catching on fire doesn't mean it doesn't work well against being in a car accident. You know, did you kind of feel like maybe that was a weird analogy?
But, no, it is a weird analogy, but,
no, but
it's
you have a safety measure.
The enemy of the good is the perfect, which is if it's not perfect, some people will dismiss it, but if it's good or even very good, we should still do it. And what you're saying is this is good against a whole bunch of variants. It may not be perfect against all of them, but it's pretty damn good. So some people are calling a mix and match strategy the right strategy. Take one vaccine and then another vaccine in your second dose, and somehow that might give you greater protection against the variants. What do you think of that?
We don't know. It's too early. It's once again the science takes a long time to determine whether or not something works, and there's conflicting studies everywhere. What we do know, which is very good news, is that mix and matching vaccines doesn't kill you immediately. That is good. Right? So many people were very, very concerned that if we mix and matched vaccines, effectively something similar to spontaneous combustion may occur, and that does not happen. So what we did find out is that that mixing and matching vaccines does carry at least similar immunity, apparently, to vaccine first 2 doses, and that it doesn't apparently significantly increase your risk of death. Okay, which is excellent news.
That is good news. What about the time period between first dose and second dose? There's some studies and reports that have suggested that it was supposed to be, what was it, initially 2 weeks or something like that, and then it was expanded to 4 months. And now people think that there is a benefit to actually waiting a while to get that second dose, maybe not 4 months, but a while, because it gives you an added boost to the immune system. What do you think of that?
Okay. 2 things. First, we're going to have to get a 3rd, 4th, 5th, et cetera, down the line dosed booster for COVID mutating and us having to just roll out different versions of the shot. Virtually every pharmaceutical company has said this. Most of the medical community has said this. COVID shots are going to be similar to the new flu shot, except unlike the flu shot, it's not going to be like throwing a dart at a dartboard. So because it's much easier to resequence the COVID shots, and it doesn't mutate as quickly as the flu does. So that's one thing. So we're going to be getting more shots anyways. So it's not really that critical of a question on one side. The other thing, Canada in general adopted the give you the first dose way earlier strategy because the first dose provided partial immunity, and there was a section of people that, had they got COVID without getting the first dose, probably would have died. So if we're going to 3-dose you or 4-dose you over the next year or 2 years anyways, we might as well save the people we can with the 1-dose safety or the 1-dose protection earlier, was basically the sacrifice we made. So you know what? This strategy may hamper or may help, we don't know, our immunity in the medium term. But the ideal here is that we will net save more people because of front loading the first dose protection. That was the decision we made. We may be wrong, we may be right, we don't know. But it was a sound decision at the time, given the supply that we had. We basically went through all of our second dose supply so that we could save as many people with the partial protection as possible, as early as possible.
And is that a different strategy than other countries have pursued?
Yeah, but they have different supply. And I think Germany did the same thing that we did, and then then very few other countries did. But we're ahead of most countries. I have to go through all the math in my head on how far everybody is. But we're scheduled to be ahead of most countries through immunization, especially the ones that aren't developing the vaccine directly. And frankly, Canada is being criticized globally for hoarding vaccines. So if your country is being criticized for hoarding, I don't think we should be also criticizing ourselves for not doing it fast enough. Let's be honest here. It's kind of a catch-22 there. It's like, you can't do both. So further, right now, if you're looking at like hot zones and what's happening in Ontario, we're ramping up now the people who got immunized in the beginning of May and throughout May to being on, instead of 16 weeks, they're going to 4-6 weeks now. So whenever we're able to, with supply permitting, we're bringing down that gap anyways. So it's we chose to vaccinate people earlier so that less people would die with partial protection. And when we get the chance with supply, we're doing it faster. I'm frankly just not very concerned with vaccine rollout. I think we're doing as good as we're going to do.
Okay, what about the type of vaccine? It seems that the messenger RNA vaccines have been far more successful, haven't had nearly as many side effects. Their efficiency is higher. They haven't had a lot of these surprises that the more traditional vaccines, AstraZeneca, J&J, have had. If given the choice, should you take a mRNA vaccine?
I believe a bunch of other math was, and this is just to put this in perspective, I think a significant amount of risk math was done on comparing vaccines to many over-the-counter drugs that you take for various conditions, and all of the vaccines had lower risk than things that we regularly take. So I think it's almost a non-issue. It's both, the risks of all of them are so low. It's like comparing a 1 in 50,000 to a 1 in 200,000. But the COVID death is 1 in 50. Who cares?
In its judgment, has stopped AstraZeneca.
No, well, I mean, it hasn't. It has limited supply, and it has the opportunity to give people a different vaccine and people wanted it. We're still giving AstraZeneca to people who've already gotten the first dose when we can. There's a supply issue. So not really. I mean, we have
AstraZeneca first dose, and I'm told I can't get the AstraZeneca second dose.
Well, then there's a supply issue. If you look at what's happening in the UK, they're going full on AstraZeneca, right? You get the vaccine that you can get, or you choose to roll the dice that are very much so against your favor. But we're dealing with such low probabilities here.
The G7 met this past weekend, and they actually, in their communique, said that they want China to launch an investigation of the source of COVID-19. And there were a lot of people initially, a couple of months ago, that said to sort of suggest China did something to proactively create COVID-19 or not take strong enough action against its spread was racist. Now the G7 is actually saying, let's find out. What do you think about that?
Okay, this is going to be I'm going to answer your question differently because I think it's important to give you some context for this issue. In 2017, I believe it was, some Canadian scientists who are not specialists in this area got $100,000 and resequenced cowpox. So they made cowpox, which is basically a mini smallpox. That was 3 years ago with 100 grand. If you have a specialist that knows what they're doing outside of a government, they can make a super weapon that can wipe out 50% of the human race with next to no funding. I don't care about a Chinese lab. I don't care about an American lab. There are far bigger problems. Okay? I really don't. CRISPR and someone with a serious background of information in this field, if they want to, can wipe out the planet.
Okay, well, that's a very positive.
Well, look. We're concerned about this thing leaked from a lab. You're concerned about COVID. We're still storing smallpox. We still are. The Americans and the Russians have been repeatedly told by the United Nations that there is no research benefit to retaining smallpox, and they still are. Okay? We're worried about nothing in the context of the things that are out there. If one person that is particularly intelligent in a specific area and motivated wants to, they can wage war on the planet. And we're concerned about that lab. It's not a comparable national security risk. It's just not.
Okay. So what should we do to protect ourselves from rogue specialists that have $100,000 and want to create the superbug?
Well, there's a bunch of things you can do, but you're not going to like it. How do I make sure that a whole bunch of people with this knowledge base don't do bad and horrible things?
Yes.
Okay, well, think about that. So once you get to a certain education level, I have a team of people watch you for your entire life?
Well,
we already do that, but that's the point, right?
Iran or Iraq would be watched like that.
Well, yeah, but and this is the point, right? So at some point, when people get an education level or get an experience level to the degree required where they're able to actually do stuff like this, they give up all personal freedom. Okay? Governments don't engineer and release super weapons at any greater risk than what people are able to do. Look into, this is such a huge issue with so many different parts to it. And it's still complex. I'm not that concerned about a coronavirus from a lab in China compared to the national security risk of lone wolves. It's not even comparable.
Okay, so this G7 investigation of the Chinese lab is a waste of money and time.
Well, further, do you think the Chinese are really going to tell them what they want to know? Either A, they're going to tell them, you can't believe what they say anyways. They're either going to tell you the truth and you're not going to believe it, or they're going to lie and you're not going to believe it. Come on.
We're chatting with Alex.
Look into what happened with you and your inspectors when they went there. Come on.
Talking about COVID-19 issues. We're going to take a break and come back with some concluding comments in just a minute. Stay with us. Well, we're back with Alex Vezina, CEO of Prepared Canada, an emergency preparedness expert. We're talking about COVID-19 and some issues associated with vaccines and vaccine passports and variants and other issues associated with COVID-19. Alex, we talked about religious or belief-based exemptions for a vaccine passport. What about medical exemptions? Should they be allowed?
Right, and I think this is where we need to really, really decide on what we're going to do, because and we've seen this really, really play out in labor labor law, and whether or not your employer is allowed to restrict employment based on whether or not you have a vaccine record. And I've heard all sorts of disagreement on what's happening with this from labor lawyers around Canada. There is some belief that if you don't get vaccinated, then that's grounds for termination because you are a hazard to the workplace, effectively, is the argument.
Well, the way they described walking around with a weapon and actually using it on people, that would be that. If that's the truth, then employers should be able to restrict.
Well, yeah. Well, that's the thing, and that's the argument. But that's the thing. It's viruses are such an intangible thing, and spreading them doesn't usually involve some form of willpower. Like coughing isn't like shooting a gun, even though in some respects it's more dangerous. Like, it's such a weird concept. When you look at the number of people who die of viral pathogens a year versus the number of people who die from bullets and knives in a year, it's such a strange concept. How this intangible thing is in some respects so much more dangerous on the macro scale, but looks so much less dangerous on the micro scale. But anyways, so when dealing with health exemptions, if Canada determines that not being vaccinated makes you a threat to public safety or public health or a hazard in the workplace, then you have to look at it as similar to whether or not you're allowed to have someone with a history of mental health concerns be a pilot, or whether or not you're allowed to have someone or whether or not we're going to have people who are quadriplegics be police officers. Because at some point you have to ask, can we exclude people from given employment based on this type of medical predicament? Like you think about this, right? So because if we make the determination, because we already have, that you cannot be a pilot with certain mental health concerns, and if you can't be a police officer because of what the job requires, without that, then do we then not make the determination that you can't work in healthcare if you can't be vaccinated for something? Well, why not stop it?
Last week, there was a huge protest outside of a Texas hospital because the president of the Texas hospital was demanding that every healthcare worker get a vaccine, and the workers, the nurses included, were saying this was an infringement of their human rights.
Okay, but let's think about this. Let's say that you are a police officer, and then a horrible accident happens, and you lose mobility in your lower limbs. What would then happen? How would you normally get paid from that?
Long-term disability.
You'd go on some form of long-term disability because your normal form of gainful employment has been made obsolete to you. Same thing with a pilot. So then therein, if we excluded healthcare workers from working in their field because they required vaccination, and they have a medical reason that they couldn't do it, are you then not creating a new disability category inherently? Just think about this for a moment. This is a novel concept. So if you cannot do what is required to work in your field, and this was just thrust upon you, you have a medical condition that prevents you from doing something that makes you safe in the workplace.
Not a choice based on a religious belief or just a belief, but
no, your medical condition is precluding you from being safe in the workplace. Your medical condition is precluding you from working. Your inability to be vaccinated is a medical disability, effectively. Yes.
Yep.
I guess everyone who is, so the broader you make it, where people can't work with a medical exemption, the broader you're going to have to open up disability. You don't have a choice. So that is an interesting question. This is one thing why I'm saying, the implementation of this, you got to be very careful, because there's downstream effects to decisions. You effectively do things that you don't realize you're doing.
Even if we offer compensation, do you think it's a human right that people should get to turn it down? Turn down getting the vaccine.
Well, is it a human? Well, here's the problem. When you think about this from a public health perspective, is it a human right? And there's disagreement in public health on this. Is it a human right to be a pilot with a mental health condition?
No.
Then is it a human right to put people at risk without being vaccinated? And this sounds like apples to oranges, but it's public safety. It's very much apples to apples in the minds of a lot of people in public safety. So this is where you get into the weeds a bit, and it gets really
Alex
complex.
Vezina, not in your personal opinion, but in your professional opinion.
I haven't said anything personal.
I know, as a professional, an emergency preparedness professional, you're effectively saying, I think, that we should, number one, have vaccination passports. In fact, you said, of course, like it's the right thing to do. And then number two, they should be required for people to be at any international travel, for sure, any kind of potential super spreader event, which I think would include a major concert or assembly of any sort, church, I would presume, a political event, etc. And further, you think that it should be required to be a healthcare worker, where you're putting people at risk, and employers can demand it of their employees, because those people are going to come to work and potentially infect others. And the way you described it is you're carrying around a weapon and you're discharging it.
No, just to clarify there. I think that we need to decide where we're siding on those issues, and then contingent on where we decide, we should be consistent. It's a different opinion. It's a different perspective here, because if we decide that certain core tenets or parts of Canadian culture are more important than human life, then we make that decision. And don't be mistaken on this. You are going to make the decision that other things are more important than human life in any society. Otherwise, you have a completely totalitarian state with zero freedoms. There's a constant dynamic between freedom and safety. That they're basically on a spectrum. So the decision's going to be made, but you just need to understand what you're sacrificing at each point. Here's I think a way to phrase it, mixing the professional and the personal. If you asked me how to protect a society and make sure no one ever died, I would design a system that would do it very well, and then I would move and wouldn't want to live there. Okay.
Locked down all the time.
Okay.
with Alex Vezina, he's the CEO of Prepared Canada. We've had an interesting conversation about vaccines, vaccine passports, the Delta variant. Interesting. And I guess bottom line, just go out and get a vaccine. If we all get a vaccine, we reach herd immunity. We don't have to have this discussion. So it's all within our power. Thanks, Alex, for joining us.
Thanks for having me again.
Thank you.